Every legend is defined by its rival. Walter White had Hank Schrader, a brother-in-law who laughed off the clues until it was almost too late. But what if Walter's opponent wasn't Hank? What if instead it was Sergeant James Doakes?
Surprise, motherfucker.
Doakes is more than just a meme. He was one of television's most relentless hunters. A man who smelled blood the moment he was near Dexter Morgan. Doakes doesn't need hard proof to know when something is wrong. He relied on instinct, suspicion, and sheer force of will. So what happens when a man who sees through masks crosses paths with Walter White? A man who survives precisely because everyone underestimates him. This isn't just a clash of lawman versus criminal. It's a collision between paranoia and deception, suspicion and manipulation. And in this video, we'll explore two scenarios. One where Doakes steps directly into Hank's shoes after the pilot, and another where he works alongside Hank as Gomez's replacement. In both, the question remains the same. Could Doakes break Heisenberg before Walter's lies consumed everything? So the reason I'm starting this after the pilot is that Hank is needed so he can give Walter the idea to make meth and give him the ride-along to an actual drug bust. Which leads to Walter discovering Jesse was Captain Cook, which leads to the duo teaming up. So to avoid making a bunch of stuff up, it's simpler if the pilot is exactly the same, but in this scenario, Hank gets promoted to Washington, D.C. or something, and then James Doakes replaces him in episode 2. Little did Walt know, but he forgot a respirator in the desert that the DEA is gonna find. So basically, Doakes will find the gas mask that belongs to the school Walt goes to. He will find out that the equipment is missing from Walter's class and question him heavily. He'll probably still arrest that one janitor at the school like Hank did in the show and may put Doakes at ease for the moment. However, when Walter blew up Tuco's headquarters, he walked out and many people saw his face. Since it's an explosion, of course the cops were alerted to this explosion, and while the show dismisses this detail, it's possible at least one person there said a bald white dude walked out of the building right after the explosion, which could bite Walter in the butt later. After that, when Walter goes missing in season 2, Doakes wouldn't be there to look for Walter. Therefore, he never finds out about Jesse selling Walter some weed. So he misses out on a huge clue, and overall Jesse is never on his radar ever. A big change is that Tuco may survive, or Walter and Jesse have to finish him off since Hank isn't here this time. Tuco being alive may change the timeline too much, so we can say Walter and Jesse have a rematch with him and then kill him. This could lead to the twins wanting to kill Walter White later, since he literally is the one that killed Tuco this time. During the situation with Badger, Walter will distract Doakes so Jesse can warn Badger like in the show, and everything goes exactly the same, but will probably put Walter on Doakes' radar. Though that's unlikely since it looks like a coincidence and Doakes is missing clues from previous situations for him to think any more about Walter. But then again, Doakes doesn't believe in coincidences. Even if Doakes knows about a bald dude walking out of Tuco's office somehow, it could easily be James Kelly, not Walter. Overall, due to not being a family member, Doakes would have less chances to catch on to Walter, but there's a chance he may suspect Walter because of the gas mask situation. But Walter wouldn't put up so many signs he's a weirdo like Dexter would, and therefore I think it's unlikely Doakes would seriously go after Walter. Yet. Heading to season 3 and 4, the main change here is that the twins could definitely come after Walter White, while Gus wouldn't have someone else to blame for Tuco's death this time. Gus can't kill them outright since the cartel may be mad at him. So maybe he has them arrested, like something similar he did in Better Call Saul? Hard to say. Anyway, Jesse will sell the woman at the gas station that meth, and Doakes will question her, which will lead to him seeing the RV in the ATM camera, which leads to him finding out Combo owns the RV and goes to his house. However, that's where the investigation probably ends, since Doakes would have never known about Jesse Pinkman at all, and thus wouldn't think twice about the picture in Combo's house. The only way he could find out about Jesse is if he investigates Combo's whole life, like he did with Dexter, and find out everyone he's ever been friends with, and figure out Combo was friends with Badger, and then investigate Badger from there, and find the RV that way. But that's 50-50 in terms of likelihood. If we go in that direction, Walter and Jesse will never know Doakes is about to find the RV, since the only reason Walter had a chance to get rid of the RV was because Hank called Walt asking about it. Obviously, Doakes wouldn't call Walter at all. He'd follow Badger until he finds the RV with the equipment inside, and the DEA will look for fingerprints, and then bam, Walter's arrested, without Walter ever having a chance to do anything about it. Even if Badger doesn't lead Doakes straight to the RV, Doakes will at one point follow Jesse, since Badger goes to his house often. However, this will only happen if Doakes makes the connection between Combo and Badger, which is very shaky. Now, let's say Doakes doesn't make the connection between Combo and Badger. What happens then? Well, assuming everything goes exactly like the original timeline did, the next time a clue shows up is after Gale is killed and the cops find his lab notes. It's possible Tim Roberts may give the notes to the DEA, and then Doakes can get the notebook that way and start investigating. It's decently likely Doakes will think Gale is Heisenberg, just like Hank did at one point. The only reason Hank stopped thinking that is because of Walter, while drunk, told Hank that Gale was more like a copycat. Obviously, this wouldn't happen with Doakes, so there's nothing going against the idea that Gale is Heisenberg, since his notes detail how he makes the blue meth. However, since he'll never give Walter the notebook for tips, like Hank, he won't have an explanation for the WW thing. It's possible he may suspect Walter White here, but again, it's shaky. Plausible, but dubious. He may find the connection between Gale and Los Pollos Hermanos, since being a vegan and yet for some reason having a Los Pollos Hermanos poster is strange. Doakes would look into Madrigal as a whole and notice that they have a random tiny foothold in American fast food. He'll notice a mainly German company being in business with the same restaurant Gale has a poster of to be very interesting. Even if Doakes gets the idea to get a fingerprint from Gus to match the one from the crime scene, this whole thing ends with Gus simply killing Doakes anyway, since nobody would stop him like how Walter stopped Gus from killing Hank. So in the end, Doakes dies from Gus's hand. However, let's say Doakes simply doesn't make the connection between Gus and Gale, and the Gale case goes cold. Can Doakes still do something later? Well, assuming everything goes exactly the same as in the regular timeline, and Gus dies, the DEA will discover the meth lab anyway, and then it'll become clear Gus did indeed have something to do with Gale's notes. While the DEA and Doakes catch on that Gus was a drug kingpin, Walter would still be in the clear in the beginning of Season 5 with hardly any differences to the original timeline, since Walter covered his tracks well. It's decently likely Doakes will notice something is up with Lydia, since even Hank noticed Lydia's shoes weren't matching. He may cling to this and then tail Lydia, since he'll be wondering who was the middleman between Gus and Madrigal, which could be troublesome for Walter, Jesse, and Mike, but it's hard to say exactly what would happen. It's possible later on Doakes will catch the lawyer that was representing the prisoners, just like Hank did. However, Walter wouldn't happen to be there when Gomez gives the news to Hank, and thus Walter overhears and warns Mike. So Mike in this timeline would most likely go to prison because the lawyer snitched on him, but Mike would never snitch on Walter, Jesse, or Saul, so they're safe anyway. I do think there is a funny scenario where Doakes might think Mike is Heisenberg himself. I'll explain. Doakes, having investigated Tuco and Mike extensively, finds out about the incident where Mike had a violent altercation with Tuco, finding a connection. Then with that information from bystanders from that incident at Tuco's hideout where an old, bald man is seen walking out, Doakes might think that white old bald man is Mike himself. Then with Mike having an offshore bank account but in his granddaughter's name, and with the lawyer snitching on him, everything will weirdly point toward Mike being the mastermind this whole time. Also, there's the mystery of who killed Tuco in Season 2, and Mike having a history with Tuco. Doakes might think Mike killed him in some kind of drug dealer drama. Sure, Doakes will notice Mike has no official record of knowing anything about chemistry, but Gale could have helped make the meth, and Mike killed him the same way he killed Tuco. All these clues and coincidences will confirm in Doakes' mind that Mike is his guy. After all, Doakes said he doesn't believe in coincidences once again. As for why blue meth continues to be sold afterwards, Doakes may conclude Mike simply had a third partner who knows how to make his meth but was never caught. With that, things are mostly the same afterwards, but without the drama with Jesse, since Walter never needs to send Jesse away to Alaska since Hank isn't around, and thus the Walter versus Jesse situation never starts. So overall, unless fate is against Walter and he gets very unlucky to the point where Doakes catches on to him, in my opinion, I think Doakes most likely would never catch Walter. Hank being related to Walter is the only reason there are so many close calls between them in the first place. Therefore, there would simply be nothing for Doakes to latch onto. In the end, Hank only found out because he got lucky and found the book in Walter's bathroom. Obviously, nothing like that would ever happen with Doakes since he would never be at Walter's house. Pretty similar to how in the Dexter show, one of the main reasons Dexter is on Doakes' radar is because the plotline with the ice truck killer dropped hints and clues for Doakes to pick up on. However, in Breaking Bad, without Hank, I think there wouldn't be anything like that. If Dexter and Doakes weren't literally working in the same building and working at the same crime scenes, I think it's very likely Doakes would never suspect Dexter anyway, and I think that's exactly what is going to happen here with Walter White. Now, there are a few situations where he could catch Walter, which is the respirator situation, the RV situation, and then following Lydia. For the respirator, you would have to actually think Doakes would suspect Walter from the jump immediately and entail him despite there being a couple of other possible suspects, since Walter isn't the only person with keys to the storage room at the school. As for the RV situation, you would have to actually think Doakes would look into everyone Combo has ever met, find out that he was friends with Badger, and then follow Badger or Jesse to the RV. As for Lydia, he could suspect her and then keep an eye on her, and then be there for when she lets Jesse into the facility to get a barrel of methamphetamine. That would be the only moment Doakes could get a big break on the case. From there, after arresting them, Doakes would ask Jesse and Lydia who else was involved in their scheme. Well, Jesse wouldn't snitch, Lydia definitely would, and then bam, jail time for Walter. Unless you believe that happens, then Doakes has no other way to catch Walter. Also, another thing I need to mention is that in Breaking Bad, there's a luck mechanic some characters have that usually determines whether they live or die. Walter White has the greatest luck stat in the verse, and most likely Walter's luck would protect him from any possible breaks Doakes could obtain on the Heisenberg case. Not to say Batman or L from Death Note would never ever catch Walter because he's too lucky, but that the combination of the clues being scarce and Walter's luck, I think Doakes would never catch Heisenberg. The characters are too distant, Walter is too lucky, and overall Walt doesn't give off the same creeps or signs Dexter does in his show anyway. In the next scenario where Gomez is replaced by Doakes and is Hank's partner, this is going to be much more stressful for Walter for sure, since even all the way in the ride-along, there's two details that will bite Walter in the ass later. First detail is that Walt corrects Hank's remark about mustard gas being in the meth lab and says it's phosphine gas. Then he waits for a moment and says, I think. A detective like Doakes, who isn't close to Walter, would notice he seems to know a lot about making meth. Obviously, you can argue that's natural for someone like Walter, but Doakes probably wouldn't know that. Then the second detail is that Walter asks if he could go inside and see the meth lab for himself. Doakes would probably find this weird, similar to how he finds Dexter weird due to the ways Dexter reacts to crime scenes. It won't be a big deal at that moment, but all this will plant a seed in Doakes' head for later. Then later on, when they discover the respirator in Walt's school, Doakes, just like in scenario 1, will be on Walter's ass. Even if he doesn't go with Hank to the school, he'll find out from Hank later that someone went into the storage room and had a field day with the equipment. Even Hank joked to Walter that he didn't want people to think Walter took the equipment. Doakes will not think lightly of this idea because of the stuff Walter said in the pilot. Would Doakes seriously suggest Walter is making meth at that moment? Hard to say. But it's likely that Hank would dismiss the idea anyway. However, this is definitely putting Walter on Doakes' radar. Not much would happen after this until we get to the part where Tuco abducts Walter and Jesse. Hank would tell Doakes that Walter is missing, which Doakes might not think much of until later since at that moment he's leading the manhunt for Tuco. Hank at this point knows Walter has a second cell phone. He'll then ask Doakes to track the car that Jesse owns, and then from there Hank will go to Tuco's shack. Everything would go the same, but the aftermath is the interesting part. Hank was already extremely suspicious of Jesse and knew he had something to do with Tuco since his car was there. Doakes would ask why he was even looking for Jesse in the first place, and it's here that Hank would tell him that he was looking for Walter, since Walter at one point bought weed from Jesse and thought that maybe Jesse knew where Walt was. Doakes with this information would make his radar go crazy and immediately think that Walter was also involved, since the timing of the disappearance is too bizarre. But Hank would probably feel offended by this and shoot the idea down, since Walter at this point is in the hospital and would have lots of pity for him. However, this would still at least plant the idea that Walter is guilty in Hank's mind, maybe even making him think twice about Walter having a second cell phone. Doakes, meanwhile, is now officially suspecting Walter for making meth, but wouldn't quite know the ins and outs of his relationship with Jesse and Tuco. He'd hear about the fugue state and think that Walter is acting. While Hank doesn't want to act on this, Doakes will secretly investigate Walter on his own time by himself, just like he does with Dexter. Doakes will probably try following Walter during the time he and Jesse are recovering from the Tuco situation. He'll follow Walter to the store, and is 50-50 on whether or not he notices Jesse with him. Walter walks out of the store first and could drive away, making Doakes also drive, which could prevent Jesse from being seen. Since Walter and Jesse are both lucky, I'll say Doakes simply doesn't notice Jesse. Later on, however, when Jesse stupidly drives the RV right in front of Walter's house, this could be the end for the duo if Doakes happens to be there. It just depends if he's working or not at the time. If he is there, it's pretty much game over. There is a chance he may not arrest them right then and there, and would probably take pictures of them together. Doakes will probably wait for them to go inside Walter's house when Walt is giving Jesse some money, and then go to the RV and break in, finding the meth lab equipment. They'd then be arrested, and Doakes will find the money Walter just gave Jesse and probably find the money in the air vent either immediately or slightly afterwards. However, let's say Walter and Jesse are once again lucky and Doakes just so happens to be working on the job when Jesse appears with the RV. Then what happens? Assuming Doakes doesn't decide to follow Jesse and stays following Walter, he'll notice Walter going to the desert and then follow him until Jesse shows up with the RV. They do this multiple times, so the idea of them being lucky and Doakes is busy working every single time is too unbelievable. Due to this, he'll most likely catch them making meth together at some point. I will say that the only reason Dexter always knew Doakes was watching him was because Doakes made it obvious on purpose and was always in general highly confrontational with Dexter. With Walter, I think Doakes might not do this at all since the relationship is different. Here, Walter is his partner's brother-in-law, not his fellow employee like with Dexter, where Doakes sees Dexter every day and works with him constantly. Since the dynamic is different here, I think Doakes will in turn act differently and be more subtle with Walter. So that's why I think Walter would never catch Doakes following him. You would have to argue that Walter has better perception than Kim Wexler, who caught someone tailing her one time while driving. Also, Francesca also caught on to the cops following her multiple times. Therefore, since Walter is smarter than them, it also noticed Doakes. However, you can argue Doakes is better at tailing than those other people, but there's not much reason to say that since Dexter caught him multiple times. It's too inconclusive. Therefore, somewhere in the first couple of cooks after Tuco's death, Doakes will most likely catch Heisenberg. However, this doesn't have to be the end of the line. I think there's a chance, just like when Doakes tried to arrest Dexter, Walter and Jesse could catch Doakes off guard and subdue him. He was only super careful with Dexter because he knew Dexter knew how to fight. Here, there's no reason for Doakes to be careful with an old man with cancer and then some skinny guy. He had tried to arrest them, but one of them would knock him out from behind when he's not looking or something. So there's a good chance they'd probably take him to Jesse's apartment and tie him up or handcuff him, similar to what they did with Crazy 8. The situation also seeming similar to when Dexter put Doakes in a cage. Since Walter's a bit more experienced with killing at this point, it'd be more likely to kill Doakes quicker than he did with Crazy 8. It's either that or he gets arrested. There's no chance Walter would have any warm feelings for Doakes either, since Doakes is blunt, distant, and overall more of an asshole than Gomez, who genuinely seems nicer. Doakes would probably try to manipulate Walter into letting him go, just like he tried to do with Dexter. Also, from Walter's experience with Crazy 8, who lied to him and almost successfully tricked him with a plate shard, Walter would never fall for Doakes' manipulation, which wasn't that impressive to begin with. Therefore, if Doakes is captured by Walter and Jesse, Walter will most likely kill Doakes and melt him in a barrel. From there, maybe Hank might catch on and suspect Walter because of what Doakes told him in the past and then disappearing. But that's irrelevant to the video. So yeah, to conclude, I don't think the scenario would go past season 2 because of the Tuco situation that put Doakes on Walter's trail. Doakes has too much information this time and his instincts would make him strike and act on his information. So either Doakes catches Walter when Jesse appears with the RV in front of his house, or he catches them on a future cooking session, or instead underestimates them and ends up being captured and killed by Walter in the end. Which seems like something that might happen in Breaking Bad, since Walter gets lucky all the time and people tend to underestimate him because of his old age and the way he acts. Plus, on Doakes' end, he tends to be unlucky. He managed to escape just to get captured by some coke dealers. Sure, Dexter saves him, but Doakes is put right back in the cage later on, only to die to Dexter's crazy girlfriend. Overall though, Doakes has a huge advantage in this scenario compared to the first one, and is much more likely to catch Heisenberg thanks to being next to Hank, but might still fail if he's unlucky, similar to his show where fate doesn't seem to be on his side.